have you, or were you at any of the public presentations we did for the Jacksonville boundary extension for their district before? I know you two were. Anyone else? Okay, so you all have never seen me before, and you've never seen a presentation like this, right? Okay, that gives me an idea how fast I want to go. So we've got about a half hour, which isn't a lot of time. And my name's Cody Wright, and I was hired by the city through Jacksonville Main Street and the commission to be the consultant that drove this project, this certified local government funded project, through the nomination process for the National Register of Historic Places. And we're at the very end phase of this project, which has been a year long. We started back about this time in 2017. And we're at the process now where the last thing we have left to do is this public presentation. And then at the end of the month, we present before the state's Illinois State Historic Sites Advisory Council. And if they like the presentation, and we already have a positive preliminary opinion on that, then they will recommend listing, and it goes to the National Park Service in Washington, D.C., and we all cross our fingers and hope they accept it and they list us. And so that's where we're at right now. We're at the end of the process. So and this is a critical phase because this is when you always do the public presentation and you address questions that the public may have before you forward it on to the council. So they have to have this done. And so that's why we're here. And I'll just run through the presentation now, and we'll try to have a little bit of fun. I don't like these boring, scholarly presentations, so we'll just do it my way. And at the end, I'll leave room for plenty of questions if you have them, and hopefully the presentation will answer most of your questions. And Judy gave me this clicker, so let's see how that works. I love these things. I love this picture. This is what it's all about. Everyone probably, if you live in Jacksonville, you know where this is at. And I love this picture because it shows every kind of transportation conveyance except for railway that was available back at that time. You've got streetcars. I think you actually have a horse-drawn streetcar in the background still. You've got buggies, horses, people walking. It shows a vibrant downtown. Fantastic picture. And here's the agenda for what we're going to be discussing tonight. What's preservation? What is the National Register? Benefits and disadvantages, a history of the process. And I'm just going to blaze through that because I don't want to bore you with all that. History and contemporary photo overview, that you'll like. Historic photos, then we'll see modern photos, kind of see how they stack up against each other, see how the district may have changed over the years and how it's similar also. Maps of the district boundaries. And then it'll show contributing and non-contributing properties. In other words, properties that still retain enough historic integrity that if you came to town and we're doing a little drive-by window photographic, tourist thing, and you're looking for those photo ops and you want to see historic buildings, that the district maintains enough character, and those buildings that are still historic to you, we would consider to be contributing buildings. They contribute to the character of the district. The buildings that you look at, you go, like the kids say, meh, you don't know what they mean, you don't know what style they are, you don't know what time period they're from, they're not giving you a sense of anything. Those would be your non-contributing buildings. And we only have a small, not even a handful of those within the district, which is great. So you'll see that the district is rich with contributing resources. And that's why we got the positive opinion from the state, which is wonderful. Preservation champions and protects places that tell the story of the past. Oh, by the way, this was a potential tax credit project in Winchester, a little town next door. That's the Winchester Grade School. Sold for $6,000 to a wealthy music industry person from New York. He invested about $1.5 million in it and turned it into high-dollar lofts on the second floor and a museum on the first floor. And the city was going to tear it down. It was going to cost them about $60,000 to demo it and move it away. And we were able to broker a deal with them. They released it to him for $6,000. That's historic preservation. And that's where you get into the economic benefit of preservation too. And here we talk about, these are some of the benefits of the activities that surround preservation. You get surveys done, you get a historic designation either by the locality or by the National Register or by the state itself. They oftentimes can include some regulatory issues if it's locally landmarked, where they want to review what you're going to do to the outside of the building. Maybe they don't want pink elephants chasing orange giraffes across the front of your commercial building downtown. I don't know. But that's kind of what we're talking about there. Hands-on building improvements, equal opportunity tourism, heritage tourism, I think, is what we're really talking about there. It increases heritage tourism in your downtowns, particularly in a downtown district like this. You can read these. I don't want to read every single one of them. I'll let you just glance at them. But the last two, to me, are the most important. And the last one is a quote that I actually leaked out about 25 years ago at a national conference in Chicago. And I'll just give it to you in my own words. I'll read it again. It says, and what I did is I flashed on the screen a picture of a fellow. I zoomed in on a picture of a fellow from about 1910. He was standing on a street corner downtown. And you could actually see his face. A lot of times you can't see the faces of these people in these historic photos. Which led me to say this: if we can no longer remember their names and faces, and I asked the audience, I said, is there anyone here that knows this fellow in this picture? Of course, nobody did. And I said, well, what a shame. I said, because that's a fate all of us are going to have. 100 years from now, I guarantee you almost nobody will know who any of us are. If we no longer remember their names and faces or discern any spark left of their lives, let us at least preserve what is left of the background of their lives, the very places they were long ago seen and known. And I think that's profound, and it's not because I said it. I probably stole it from some Greek philosopher in my sleep or something, but I just think that's what we all think about occasionally in the back of our brains, that we want to be remembered. And if they can't remember us, at least remember the places where we were. Remember our footsteps. This guy. Does anybody know this guy? Anybody? He's not related to anybody maybe from Jacksonville? Nice bike. He's wearing a uniform like he's a delivery guy, but we don't know who he is. But guess what? We know where he's at. Can you identify where he's at on the square? What corner he's at? And looking this way, you've got, I think I'm right, Judy, Hawken Hall here. So we know that's where the coffee shop is now. And this look right here with the new plaza, it's actually still there. In a sense, it's still there. So we can identify that area from this photograph. And I think we honor this guy and everybody else that ever walked downtown or their lives intermingled or it was important to them at all. We honor them by attempting to preserve and restore and maintain this historic downtown. So he is not forgotten. This is humorous. Do you prefer this or this? It's funny because I added a photo in there of Jacksonville. Apparently it didn't like it today, so it's blown it out. Let's see if it comes up again. There it goes. Oh no, that's not Jacksonville, that's down in southern Illinois. But anyway, that's kind of a no-brainer. If you don't have any protection at all, and protection sometimes can be as simple as just having the designation that, hey, this is a historic district. Whether it's locally landmarked and has local ordinances or not, may not even matter. Just the fact that your community takes pride in this area, in the town, means something to this community, and it's worth people investing in and maintaining. And oftentimes that's all you have in a community. It just has a designation. And many communities have been able to grow their downtown commercial districts, maintaining them that way with nothing more than a simple designation. These are the levels of historic designation that exist. National Historic Landmark status, that's the highest status you can get. That would be like the Washington Monument. anything that has to do with DC, the Lincoln Home, anything that has to do on a national scale with the history of America. Then you've got the National Register of Historic Places, and that's a designation we're keying in on. That's where the National Park Service agrees with the locals that this district that we are nominating has great significance regarding the history of this community. And it has a significance in a much larger area than just this community. It actually has some regional significance. State Historic Property Register, I don't even think they maintain that anymore. So it exists, but I don't really think they maintain it, so we're not worried about that. The main thing we're looking for here is the NRHP, the National Register. This talks about it was created in 1966, and it was actually created because of the Eisenhower Expressway system that was being built across America. And they were literally obliterating historic neighborhoods by the thousands across America to put in the clover leaves and all of the fixtures of the interstate highway system, and no one was stopping them at all. They weren't even relocating people. They were just buying them out and saying, you're gone, your neighborhood's going, see ya, we're putting a highway in. And the outcry was immense. And the outcry led to this National Historic Preservation Act. And what it would say is that if you're using federal funds or getting a federal permit, if there's any federal oversight at all in what you're doing, and it could be some kind of a welfare program, it can be a Social Security program, anything like that, anything that has federal dollars or oversight attached to it, if it affects a property that is historic, you have to stop and have your project reviewed by the state that is representing the federal government, and they can use federal preservation law to force you to change your project so that you may protect that property, or there may be some kind of a concession made to the owner of that property that's very significant. But it causes them to stand back and take a look at what they're planning to do and to lower the impact of that overall project on the historic property. So that is a clear-cut protection that you have by having your downtown listed on the National Register of Historic Places. Like if they wanted to, for some reason, put an airport close by, expand, or put some kind of regional transport system that would run right through the downtown and would wipe out half the buildings, that would have to be reviewed and approved by the state and the federal government. And most likely they would make some huge concession to avoid the damage to the historic downtown. Another community that was not listed, they would just go ahead and do what they always do. They would declare eminent domain, take everything they need, the heck with the community. This is just saying that this is going to be a district listing, and it's listed under these two categories. It's listed for events and activities, which is the downtown of Jacksonville was the central focus for downtown Jacksonville, for social affairs, for business, whatever. It was the center of Jacksonville, and in a sense it still is today. When I come to Jacksonville now, I used to always say, the only reason I came to Jacksonville was to buy underwear and socks, because I lived in rural Winchester and there was nowhere where we could even buy that over there. And so I would always say, I would have to go to Jacksonville to just get food and my underwear and socks, and everybody would laugh. Well, the reality was, it was more than that. We could come downtown, we could visit, we could eat at Leo's, we could do the taco gringo thing. They say everybody likes to go to those food places when they come to Jayville. But now we have this beautiful square that's been renovated. And there's a lot more activity down here. There's been nights I've pulled around the square and couldn't find a place to park. And I love that. It reminds me of when I was a kid. The local levels of significance is what we're keying in on here. And I just use this as an example, the little coffee pot house. Most people wouldn't give a hoot about that. I'm surprised it's still standing, but I'll tell you, if you laid one hand on that, somebody would probably take you down in that community. That's how important that little coffee pot house is to them. And that was listed on the National Register. And this just talks about the things we look for regarding integrity of the district and the buildings in the district. Location, design, setting, materials, workmanship, feeling. Are those things still present in the buildings that we're including in the district? And the answer is yes. The benefits of the register listing: prestige. That's kind of obvious. If your community is on the National Register of Historic Places, already we have a Jacksonville Historic District on the register, which is residential. Now we potentially will have a commercial district, a historic downtown on the register. And that is wonderful, because you'll now have you can have two signs up if you want on the edge of the community. Say, welcome to historic Jacksonville. Please visit our National Register listed downtown and see our beautiful neighborhoods. And that entails heritage tourism. That's what heritage tourism is all about too. And someone said, do people actually go to these communities just to see these historic properties? And I said, yes, they do. They actually do. My mom did that until she was in her early 80s and couldn't go anymore. She used to drag us out when we were kids. And we would drive to all the little historic towns in eastern Illinois and western Indiana. And maybe that's what led to my, love for historic preservation. There's the protection benefit, which we talked about. There's protection from not only the federal government for your property if you're National Register listed, but there is protection locally if you're locally landmarked, and there are ordinances that protect your building from damage or destruction or what have you. The economic benefits they're kind of twofold. One is, if you have a building that's within a district, what you'll normally find is that people in maintaining that historic property and wanting to maintain it, like if a property sells and the person is buying it, he or she is targeting that district for growth because they know things are happening there, they're going to invest money in that building. They're going to maintain the character of the exterior, the inside, they'll be able to do mostly whatever they want. But it's the idea that they'll be employing people to maintain the character and keep the building up, etc. And so there are employment benefits to having a district and having properties within that district. And also there's benefits to the store owners too, besides the infrastructure things like HVAC and electrical and plumbing and things of that sort that everybody wants to change. They don't have to do much with the outside, because the whole idea of the district is kind of sort of leave the outside alone if it's historic, if it has good integrity. You can paint it, you can put up some new signage and such, but don't blow all your money on the outside. You don't need to. We talked about this, the protection. And under the National Register, there are issues like handicap ramps. They do not require handicap ramps under ADA on National Register listed commercial buildings. They don't require them to be on the front of the buildings. If there is a way to get access somewhere else, fine. If not, you just don't have access. That's kind of sort of how that works. And because you don't want to destroy the character of the exterior, the public face of the building in putting that in. If there's another way they can work with you, the state can work with you to get access into that building, that's fantastic. And there may even be some grant money for that. We just don't know. The 20% federal tax credits are available only to building owners that own commercial historic properties. It's the most lucrative tax credit program we have in America. And I'll give you an example. The new B&B that's going in on State Street, the DeWolf House B&B, that was rezoned commercial, and that owner has applied for and is going to get the 20% federal tax credit on that investment. And he's got over $1 million investment on that property, so he'll have over $200,000 coming back to him in the form of a personal income tax credit, which is phenomenal. He can spread that out over about 10 years or so if he has a heavy tax burden. So suddenly all these buildings in the district now that normally might have been a little difficult to market depending on what the economic climate is, now you've got a new marketing tool. Hey, the building contributes within a National Register district. Any work that's done on that building, if someone buys it for $50,000 and they spend over $50,000 rehabbing the building, they'll qualify for the 20% tax credit. And so suddenly that excites people. especially if you've got somebody that knows they're going to spend $500,000, $1 million, something like that. Big numbers, very lucrative for an investor.
Are any of those retroactively applicable, or basically only from the point forward?
There is a retroactive time period. I'm not sure how many months it is, or if it's even a year. It may just be 6 months, it may be a year. And you'd have to actually contact a tax credit specialist and ask them that. And they could give you the information you need on that. There's several, you can go to the National, I believe the Park Service website and go to the section on the Historic Preservation Tax Credit, and it will give you the specs on that. So, because that is a question that comes up, well, gee, I just discovered this, and I'm already, a quarter of the way through my project. How much of this could I possibly, claim? And that'll answer that question for you. Disadvantages. I don't really see disadvantages of being listed on the National Register. I know we'll get questions about that, and I'll deal with those, but to me, it's just pluses everywhere, whether it's residential or it's downtown. And communities that I have seen in over 30 years of being involved in the preservation world that list their commercial districts on the National Register, the ones that I have gone back and visited after they were listed have shown a great economic uptick and new excitement, etc. New businesses have come in, tax revenues are better, everything seems to be better for the communities. And so the store owners are living with whether or not they have design guidelines now for what they can do on the outside or not. They're living with that. Their business is increasing. There's prosperity. I always tell everybody, and it's probably not fair for me to say this because it may not always be true, but I always say if you're against historic preservation, having a historic preservation district in your commercial district, then you're almost against prosperity because the stats are out there. You always see prosperity once the district is listed. And I don't know how you can argue with that. So something to think about at least. Here it says a property can be listed or not listed depending on if the majority of property owners would show up at this meeting tonight. And because we've got nearly 100 properties in this district, so obviously if we had 80 people here and they all said, no, we don't want this, then the state would take that into account and might just shut it down, might not list it. But I don't think that's the situation we're going to have here. Getting listed on the register doesn't automatically trigger this becoming a locally landmark district. That's up to the Historic Preservation Commission and the city to decide whether or not they want to go that distance and go ahead and locally landmark it, which is what they did with the neighborhood district recently. Now we'll get into some more fun stuff here. This was a great view of the downtown. That's the corner. We go back to this. And this right here is what you'll see in the next picture, this quadrant right in here. And this is mid-1960s. Kind of sort of the only difference, or one of the only differences, they have their signage blocks on their buildings. Not much has really changed down there. And the Central Park Plaza plan, the new plan, took into account the historic plaza, how it was laid out with sidewalks and such, and was complementary towards the historic plan that existed as far back as 1825 when the city was first founded. There was always a Central Park. And this was what was in the Central Park at the right before the turn of the century, 1890s, I believe it was. It was the Iron Fountain. Wouldn't that be wonderful if that was still there? And there's strange stories of that being carted off to the edge of town and taken to a dump. And someone came and either stole it, what was there, or whatever. But that could actually be somewhere. I envision that being inside of someone's barn, hidden somewhere on the edge of the community or something. But that's what used to be there. And that was eventually replaced by the monument that's there now in the center of the park. And this, once again, Hawk and Hall building. the northeast side of the square. There were arches originally at the 4 quadrants coming into the square, and I think that's great that the city is bringing those back. And there's how many now? 3? 2.
Gonna be another.
And there's going to be another one. Okay, that's fantastic. I love that. And once again, here's these people with unidentifiable faces. These are the places they live. These are the places of their lives. I think we do them a great honor by at least trying to preserve these places. They would be thrilled to death to know the arches are coming back. We have a picture taken in 1921 of my wife's grandmother. She's sitting on the monument right before she got married. And the monument looks exactly like it does now. And she's wearing like a little flapper's dress and everything. So some things never change, you know. The monument's still there. Fox Theater, or Fox, Illinois Theater. These are just kind of fun shots to show you what the downtown used to look like. And this was the famous water parade in the 1950s when they got water. How could you have a more enthusiastic crowd than that? 10 people deep on all sides, bands playing, pretty girls in fabulous cars. I mean, it was just great. The Ferris wheel, it's all there. America at its best. This is the lead-in paragraph on the summary that's on the National Register form. I won't read it all. If you want to just take a minute and just kind of go through it, go ahead. We've got a little bit of time. Then I'm going to zip through the pictures and then we'll open up for questions. Yeah, I know. If anyone needs any more time, raise your hand. Otherwise, I'll zip past it. Okay. And this just talks about the process, you know, what we went through to go through the nomination process. We did the historical research, we did the architectural survey, we updated the 2002 survey. We made sure the buildings that they said were historic in 2002 still retained their character. Most of them did. All of that got piled into the new nomination form, which is about 80 pages of material. This is the now. This is what we have now downtown. And you've all seen this. Sometimes it looks different on screen than in real life, but I think it looks pretty nice. This building was included in the district. We were surprised that the state liked it, and they did. So we have a funeral home in the district, still in the commercial district, and it has great integrity. Another great shot of the downtown. It's showing some activity, cars parked along the square, things are looking up, the plaza looks beautiful. That one's self-explanatory. Every time a relative comes through town, they have to comment on the courthouse. It's a beautiful courthouse. And a great restoration on it, by the way. Kudos to whatever companies were involved in that. They did a fine job. Ah, yes, the Dunlop. That's included in the district. All of these are included in the district. The World War I memorials, I did not realize of all the years I've been coming here that those were World War I memorials. Those are actually included individually in the listing on the district, which is nice. Very nice. And those were always the gateway to the park from that side of the square. Once again, great. Tom's here. Where's Tom? Where are you hiding, Tom? You recognize that building, don't you? Gee, Tom. What a coincidence to put that arch right by your building. That's fantastic. And Leo's. Great.
Let me help on the national register.
Yes,
If I
yes.
wanted to take that building, this is the
Yes.
actual example.
Yes.
If I wanted to take that building and get the 20% tax credit,
Yes.
and we looked into that,
Mm-hmm.
the only restriction that I had, and again, I'd have to ask for the 20%,
Right.
is that I couldn't hang balconies off that south side. The reason being,
Is that what the state already told you?
that's what they already told me.
Okay.
They told me that. The reason being is, as you look at the front of that building, they
Right.
want the character there,
Mm-hmm.
and they don't want a balcony balcony off the
Yeah, all
side,
of a
like you might
sudden-
see in Chicago or whatever on the river.
They would call it a pupa hanging off the side of the building or whatever. Yeah, it's something
Other
that
than
wasn't there. Other than that,
there weren't a lot of
Yeah.
restrictions.
yeah.
That was the big,
And you'll see that a lot.
so that just explains, what handcuffs they might have or what restrictions they might have.
Yeah, and that's usually a state issue because they review on behalf of the federal government, and then they send it to DC for acceptance. But you're right, yeah, they don't want anything hanging off that side right there. Now, you could put a mural on that, you could do whatever you want.
And I
You
can
could
even put-
punch
I can even put
windows.
glass doors flush with the wall.
Sure, and you
Yeah,
can
a little
punch
shut.
windows in that if you want to,
Right,
so.
pop windows in there.
Yeah.
Just can't have anything from the.
Yeah,
looking
they won't
west.
let you extend anything. And now some communities, if the communities have a history of balcony use, I've actually seen some wiggle room on that. Some communities in southern Illinois, they kind of have that New Orleans effect. They will actually allow you to do that. But it depends on what is prominent or prevalent in that community.
Just curious on
Yeah.
that, did you ever ask about putting balconies on theoretically the front?
Yeah.
That's something I thought about doing.
I doubt that, only if you want national money.
Yeah, federal, well,
Federal
or
funds.
the tax credit, yeah, yeah. The city might let you.
Well, the other buildings
Yeah.
are already done.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Screw 'em on that, yeah.
Well, and if the city ordinance would let you do that, then you could do it. You wouldn't get a tax credit, but if you just wanted to do it as a developer and the local ordinance and the review process allowed that to happen for you, good for you.
They've done that with a lot of the European
Yeah.
countries where they have small
Yeah.
balconies up front.
Yeah, the National Register doesn't restrict you in any way with anything you do with your building. I'll tell you a fact. I live in rural Winchester. Winchester, the entire town's on the National Register. And within 2 years of it being on the register, there were probably 15 demolitions of National Register newly listed properties that took place in that town. There was no stopping them. The National Register doesn't prevent you from doing anything you want to your building. The only time you're prevented is when you get federal money for it, which would be in this case that tax credit, or if you have a local ordinance that wants some review of what you're proposing to do. And it's generally always the outside, it's those photo op shots. What are you going to do to the front of your building? Are you going to change it? Are we not going to recognize it anymore? And if so, can you work with us? That's kind of how that works. And this commission has been very accommodating. My experience with working with them and reading about them and such is they have been very accommodating residential-wise. And I would assume the same is going to happen downtown if they go that route and locally landmark it. Any other questions? Go ahead and throw them out, or we'll get them out now on running through these pictures. Oh, come on.
For the people that came in late.
Yes.
Back up and start again.
We can, because we're gonna,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't think we're gonna have a council meeting, are we? There was gonna be one at 6:30, wasn't there?
Well, that's the local meeting, yeah.
The local meeting, so it's not gonna happen, right?
Well, yeah, it is. That's what some people that come in late.
Oh, okay, but there's no council here, right? Oh, okay.
But it was the
Okay.
last council meeting, don't let me put words in any of your mouths, but some of the concerns were the restrictions that might be.
Yes,
imposed
yes.
From the local
Yeah,
point of view.
and I think
National
Judy
Register,
would
and I
trust me to answer some of these questions. We have some commission members here, they can chime in too. So if you have questions about that, just hit me with them and I'll tell you, my opinion about how that would be handled, and then they can tell you, it hasn't happened yet. But I've talked to several of them, and usually the way that's handled is, like I say, the concern is always just the exterior of the building. If the building if it's beautiful, well, let's say like the Aris Bank building, the original Aris Bank building is still standing, 8 stories tall or what have you. At this point, if the local ordinance, if there was a preservation ordinance instituted for the downtown district, because it was locally landmarked, they would just follow the map and guidelines, et cetera, for the National Register. But if they locally landmark it, then that gives them some review oversight of what you want to do to the exterior of that building. So now, if the bank comes back and says, oh, we want to hang all these appendages off the front floor, all the way around the building, or we want to do this and that, they get to review that and decide, is that going to so significantly change that building that it's going to be unrecognizable? from the pictures that were just taken. And if that's the case, work with this, let's come up with something that's a little more doable and respects the historic integrity of the building. That's how those things work. They're not as contentious as everybody thinks.
Are those just lay people to make those decisions?
Are there what?
Lay people to make those, I mean, is that a committee of local people that make
It's,
those decisions? Here we are.
Here, there's a couple, 3 of them right here, and they've been making these decisions for quite a while, and Steve is the historian, and there are people that have been involved in this process for several years, and the mayor has appointed them and reappoints them if he's satisfied with what they're doing. And then I have actually been involved as a professional historic preservation consultant with the commission for a few years. And I'm just kind of hanging out there so that if there's anything that comes up that seems to be outside of their purview or maybe their knowledge, that they want to bring in someone like me, I can come over and actually sit in on a commission meeting and make comments to the commission on whatever case they may be reviewing. And so it's nice that they reached out to someone like me in case something got really difficult. And I was with the state of Illinois for over 20 years, and I was actually the cultural resource manager for the entire state of Illinois with the Illinois Historic Preservation Agency. So I guess I'm a good person to call and ask if you're gonna have a problem. So, and I don't mind doing it. I don't think I charge you anything either, do I? So, yes, sir.
I don't mean to ask a lot of stupid.
Oh, no, you're not
That's
asking stupid questions.
So, if I wanted to put a canopy up on a building,
Yeah.
is that okay by the?
Well, what do you mean by canopy? Like an overhang,
Yeah.
awning?
Yeah.
Well, if they have the, sometimes they don't even have design guidelines. If a community will have a local landmark district and their review guidelines will just say, if you're doing anything to your building on the exterior, just run it by us. Come in and, it could be a handwritten description of what you're going to do, or it could be something from your proposed contractor saying we're proposing to hang this canopy canvas awning across the front of the building. Here's the dimensions of it. Here's a little quick drawing of what it's going to look like. If they don't have any design guidelines, they have the freedom to decide whether they think that that's attractive or not, and whether it diminishes the character of the building or not. Those are things that are oftentimes not so permanent. The canopies can easily be removed down the line. They're not hurting the structure of the building. You can still see that the building is historic. So a lot of times they'll say, yeah, it's fine. We see a lot of canopies in historic
I think
buildings.
use that as an example.
It's a good example. Yeah.
Two-part question.
Sure.
First part, but what part of the process and who drafts the guidelines or the local ordinance to determine what you could do with your building? And then the second part of the question, I guess another question is, I've heard something in the media about potential opt-out for businesses. Is there any potential opt-out of a business within the district?
I don't know about that. That's usually not the case. If you're in the district, you're in the district. And
How do you retool the district?
how do you what?
How do you retool the district so you're not in it?
Oh, retool the district so you're not in it? You would have to have, like I say, you would basically have to have a majority of store owners would have to show up and oppose the National Register listing. It's going to get listed on the register anyway, because the register doesn't hurt anything. But what I think your biggest concerns are, what happens when this becomes a local ordinance controlled
Well,
district?
there's no reason anybody would ever agree to that. It's landowner. That doesn't even make sense if you're a landowner.
Yeah.
Why would someone else get to tell the landowner what they can do with their property?
Right, well, go ahead,
Yeah,
Steve.
so
Well,
There are hundreds-
Steve, it isn't gonna matter what you say. There's not a damn thing you're gonna say that's gonna change my mind. That's ridiculous.
well, what I'd like to change your mind
Well, you're not going to. I can promise you.
Is the statement you just made that there's no way that a landowner would agree to this, but hundreds of Jacksonville landowners live in the National Historic Register residential
I
district.
understand that, and I'm not one of them for that reason.
Well, that may be, but those of us who live in that district feel that there's a tremendous benefit for us.
And my kids tell me that other kids get to do things when they were growing up, and I would always tell them, who cares? That isn't gonna matter. It
So
don't
all
matter
I'm
what
saying
gonna
is
say what
that
I
a
think.
lot of your neighbors, hundreds of them,
None of my neighbors live in the historic district.
On the back of that question, who came up with the original district layout?
Oh, well, let's look at that.
Well, for instance, you cut off half the square, or a quarter of the square.
Let's look at the map here and see what we got. Can you all see the outlines of this, or okay. So are you talking about this right here that was cut off?
Yes.
Right there? That was cut off because those buildings are not historic. They have to be 50 years of age or older to be historic. So the state wouldn't accept them in the district. It was too big of a chunk. There was not any character there.
What about the US Bank building? Or whatever it's.
Which
That
one
one's
is?
the big black
On the
one
Darth
on the
Vader
square,
building?
it's non-contributing.
Oh, it's considered non-contributing. However, an interesting thing about that building is we don't know how much of it's left on the inside, but you can see that there are components of that building, exterior components that still exist on the inside of that building. Have any of you ever stared through the windows and looked and seen the exterior stone pillars that are on that building? You can still see them in there. So that's kind of interesting. But it doesn't give it any protection right now because it's completely covered up. The local ordinance would not give that building any protection because it's considered non-contributing. So essentially, the owners of that bank, or however it's marketed, it can be marketed for whatever they want to do with it. It's not non-contributing. So the ordinance would not affect the sale of that building and would not put restrictions on the owner for use or anything of that nature.
Can you re-clarify then contributing and
Yeah,
non-contributing?
contributing means the building retains most of its historic character and is easily identifiable as a historic building with an architectural style. Non-contributing would mean that the building does not have any historic character. It could look like a shoebox, and it doesn't have a style. It's not identifiable as having a specific architectural style. You can't quite tell what time period it's from exactly. And there are a few examples of that within the community and within the district here that's proposed. And those would be non-contributing. And we have a few of those.
So the
So
US
once
Bank
again, the
building?
ordinances would just not even review those.
Okay.
Point of clarification.
But they still have to follow the city ordinances for work that wanted to be done. If you go in to pull a permit,
Oh yeah, you still always got to pull a permit for whatever you do anyway, so.
Yeah.
But,
Question regarding the contributing, non-contributing distinction.
right.
Am I correct in understanding that even if a building is totally dilapidated
Yes.
and is, in, no shape to be used without
Mhm.
tens or hundreds of thousands of
Right.
dollars of renovations,
Right.
it's still considered to be contributing if it is of a certain age and has a
Right.
certain
If the
architectural
exterior,
aesthetic?
yeah, it still could be, that exterior component of it could still be contributing. Now, how the locals would handle that, that becomes an economic issue. And we have a clear example of that right now, downtown. What's the name of the building now currently?
I don't know that it has a name.
And everyone,
There's two that
please,
are already
please
slated.
forgive me, I just had my last chemo treatment 2 weeks ago. And so if any of you know what chemo brain fog is, trust me, I'm having it right now. I can't remember a lot of addresses and names, so
On East Street.
I've got to defer to Judy here. Yeah, that block, nearly an entire commercial block there, all you have left is a facade, and it's not a good facade, but it still has enough historical character that we can see it in pictures and stuff. But the building is a total gut rehab. The most the city could have possibly done was, and they weren't able to do it, was to convince a developer that, hey, why don't you just retain the front facade and do a Disney World redevelopment? Turn the inside into whatever you want. Put 6 stores in there, put, second floor apartments, what have you. But they weren't able to do it, so that we assume that is going to come down and will be redeveloped in whatever way it can be. And that the city will have some say, because it's within the district, on how it complements the district. So.
The Ayers House is a good example of what you're talking about. That building was on its way to falling down. And now, the interior is being changed significantly in order to create individual units with their own HVAC systems, et cetera. But the outside is going to be restored, and you can see the process right now. So that building will add to the beauty, attractiveness of the district that it's in, and it will be a commercially viable business. And it's brought in, I don't know, $1 million worth of investment.
It's $1.5 million
into the
project, so that's money that's going into the pocket of local contractors, and there's been a couple contractors that were pulled in from Springfield because you couldn't find anybody locally to work on it and certain aspects of it. So yes, it's a huge economic boom. I guarantee you about $1 million of that money is staying within this community, and that's absolutely fantastic. And then you'll have a viable commercial operation there, hopefully. And if not, you got a beautiful building that's going to be there for another 100 years before you have to touch it at all. So yeah, that's a tax credit. That's a federal tax credit project. The owner gets at least probably close to $300,000 back by the time he's done with that project out of his personal income tax.
But the concern I have is it's a very unique set of circumstances that brought in the gentleman who was doing that rehab.
Right.
Part of what I'm concerned about here, and part of why I asked the question, is there are some buildings, and I won't name names for fear that one of the owners may be here, but there are buildings that my companies have looked at
within this
district.
Okay.
To purchase,
right,
because they're adjacent to ours, and we have some concern about.
What's your building?
I've got 232 and 230 West State.
And what are they?
They are the Ramel Camp Bradley Law Office and the abstract.
Just got the new brick face.
Yeah.
But my concern is there are some buildings that are essentially vacant right now.
Right.
And the only economically realistic reason that I could see anybody purchasing them would be to knock them down and use the land for something else, unless they just really have a lot of capital, a lot of fund money to spend on a project like that. So my concern is that this could inadvertently lead to some stagnation where people aren't wanting to purchase these buildings to rehab them.
Well, that becomes the job of the city also, and economic development, whatever wings of city government are out there to draw businesses to the community, to educate these people that are wanting to invest in the community that, hey, downtown, these buildings that you think have no viable use, if they've got a historic exterior, you've got a historic exterior. You can do whatever you want to the inside of it. Just have your architect that you're paying that you were going to pay to design the new building, the big box store or whatever you want to put in there, stick it inside of that building. We see it all the time. We see Subways, we see Dollar Generals now are being put inside of historic buildings in historic communities. And so they're playing into we'll keep the historic front facade, but we'll put our Dollar General signage up, and when you walk in the door, it's a Dollar General store. And that's how you deal with that. And those buildings can be bought for next to nothing. And if they still have 3 walls at least that are still standing, they can be developed. You can shore up a new wall in the rear, put a new roof on and stuff. It's not necessarily horribly expensive compared to new construction, but I come from a background also, I was in the restoration business for years too, so I had to deal with a lot of these issues, and I've seen how communities deal with this. And it's usually not that much of a problem. What does become a problem is when you tear these buildings down and you put new buildings in their place that have absolutely nothing to do with the character of the district. You begin to eat away like a cancer at
Can I interrupt you,
character.
please?
Sure, absolutely.
We're back to the district. Who established this district? Is that what you did based on your research?
This is in coordination with the National Register staff at the Illinois Historic Preservation Agency. They're the ones that came and did the site visit and walked the district, and we provided them the information on where the density of character was still in the district. And this is what they agreed to. They changed our boundary probably, what, 3 or 4 times?
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's changed the
yeah.
words that much.
I'm take it to the understanding that the owners, the building owners were unaware of this being done.
Pardon me?
That the owners of the buildings were unaware that this was being done and submitted to the state?
Absolutely.
I had no idea.
This is the first I've heard about it.
We have been writing about this and sent out public newsletters more than a year ago. It's been in our newsletter. I think there was a newspaper article about us getting the grant to look into it. I can't be sure of when that would have been.
I think it was, I wasn't brought in until a year ago. I think they were already discussing the grant prior to that, probably 6 months
Well,
or so.
what's the process for reconfiguring the district?
Reconfiguring the district?
That's what I said, yes.
Well, I don't know. I don't know that there is a process for that. Because once it's going to the National Register staff and they give a positive preliminary opinion of it, it can still be listed on the National Register. There's no harm, no foul to this being a National
I
Register.
mean, that's what you
district.
say at this moment, but we
Right.
don't know what changes.
No, I
over
know
time.
there is no harm, no foul.
No, you didn't listen to what I said.
I think you're conflating some issues too.
Well, you're
Because
worried about local
we're
landlord
local,
status and about what the locals are going to require you to do, how that's going to
I
restrict.
certainly
their
am, but I
business.
don't necessarily trust that things won't change at a national level to impact what can or can't be done. I'm still scratching my head about 50 years.
Yeah.
I find that a curiosity as far as 50 years being.
Well, that's what they say. They say
Somebody
you're,
made that up.
if you're 50 years old, you're historic.
I chuckle about that right now at this point.
And I'm
I agree with
60,
that.
I'm 61, so I've been historic for 11 years.
Well,
so,
that number's just made up by somebody.
so,
Tony,
yes,
my concern, and again, I don't.
but trust me, I see your concern, I understand your concern.
I
If
don't
you think-
trust you.
If you, that's okay, I'm
That's
not with,
not personal.
I'm not with the government,
It's,
so.
well,
So-
My concern, and it is probably, might be an uneducated concern, I don't know.
Yeah.
But my concern is if I wanted to do something with my buildings,
Yeah,
and the local commission said, no, you gotta do this, 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 and this in order for me to get that done. It's almost like an unfunded mandate that I need to do it this way rather than the way that I could do it maybe more economically.
well, I know there's an appeal process, Steve can address this too.
The same questions came up about the residential district. If I want to do X to my house and those people on the Historic Preservation Commission don't like it, are they gonna make me do Y and impact my values? I've been on the commission 6 or 7 years. We haven't had one case where that sort of nightmare scenario played out. We've had a lot of cases where people came to us with proposals, things they thought they wanted to do to their property. And what ended up happening, due to a compromise, discussion, suggestions, is that something different happened, that the homeowner was happy about and that we were happy about.
Now, you're speaking specifically about residential, correct?
It's the
Owners-
same.
No, it's not the same. I'm speaking of income property, rental property, and it's a different animal.
It's a different animal,
But
but
maybe not from a historic preservation.
It's the
but
same-
From a dollar and
it's the
cents,
same issue.
From a dollar
Is
and
this
cents
property-
issue, it makes a big difference.
when I think about my house, I also care about dollars and cents. I care about whether something that somebody might decide about my house in the historic district could negatively affect property values. What you do to a commercial building, what you do to a rental building, what you do to a homeowner's occupied building, they are slightly different, but the issues are the same. Economic issues, who has control? The gentleman in the back seems to be worried about other people having control.
And me too.
And what I'm saying is, we have an example in this town, one of the largest historic districts in the state, hundreds of houses, And every week, or every month, we meet every month, people come to us with plans of change that they want to do. And we talk with them, we give them advice. Sometimes we allow the homeowners to do things that we don't really like. For example, vinyl siding on a house with wood siding. We would rather that not happen. That is not preserving the house or the historic value of the house. But we have okayed many people to put vinyl siding on their homes because we could not, in good conscience, say to those people, no, you have to paint that. You have to scrape and paint that, which might cost 3 times as much. These are your neighbors. Maybe you don't have any neighbors. These are your neighbors on the Historic Preservation Commission and also in the inspections department who are working with people. This is not some foreign group or
But the
communist.
threshold problem is this, Steve. I shouldn't have to come to you. It's my property. I should not have to come to you.
Well, that is one idea about the nature of a town. But another idea about the nature of a town is that there is a public interest in what happens in the town, and especially a public interest in what happens in the center of the town. And so this is about that public interest.
But I'm not in the center of the town.
Well,
There
See, I happen to agree that there's a public interest, but there's also private interest in my bank account.
Absolutely,
Right.
and there's an appeal
Right.
process.
right.
This is one layer of review. So you go in, you want to do something to the facade of your building. You have to go in and pull a building permit. We review only what the city requires you to get a building permit on. If you want to paint it hot pink, we're not really going to review that because you don't have to pull a permit to do that. So what you are required to pull a building permit for, then that would be the review process that we have. And we would review that, and then,
Now, are we talking about, that's the question I was going to ask. Right now, the old Circle DX gas station
yeah,
that I bought,
yeah,
that building, there's nothing historic about that building, but I just put a new roof on it, okay?
yeah,
So I had a full permit for that, I went in, city said, no, you're gonna have to go see the other city.
yeah.
And which I did, and it was fine, she says, as long as you put the same roof back on, no problem.
Yeah.
Are we talking about now, when these buildings are, if this is approved, these buildings in the downtown district, you have to go through the same process, that when we go, if I wanted to put a roof on the Andrew and Andrew building, the Sears building.
Yeah,
for
we
example.
just issue a certificate of appropriateness.
Right,
That's to make
you're
sure
talking about
that
having
you-
to now get a certificate of appropriateness for anything you do on a building in this district, which you didn't have to do before, right?
Right.
And is
That's
that
what we're
a
talking about.
separate location?
Yes. And if you don't,
No, it's a form.
But there's
It's all
one more
certificate.
step, there's
But
one
if
more
you-
step that protects you, and that is, suppose you want to do X to your building, and the Historic Preservation Commission says, no, we won't issue a certificate of appropriateness for that. You can appeal to the city council, that's what Judy mentioned about. You can appeal to the city council, and if you convince a majority of the city council that you should be allowed to do that, then they override
Yes.
us.
and
And
they
they
have
do.
done it,
And
they
they
have
can't do
done.
that.
So you
Yeah.
have, if you can't convince a majority of us or of the city council
Yes.
that what you're doing
That is the way the
is in
process
the
is.
public interest, then I think that's a reasonable level of public input. to what-
Maybe I
Your commission,
misunderstood
your
it.
commission is appointed by the city council, right?
By the mayor.
No, by the mayor.
But
So there's a
I
certain
don't know,
amount
do
of
you guys
trust
approve us?
that the mayor/city council has in your commission.
By the council.
So do you have to have a lawyer to go through all these steps? Because I may change my
No.
mind here before this is over.
No.
No. No.
Nobody's brought a lawyer to us.
Well, then I'm still against it.
Steve,
Wait, no, we did have an attorney
Make
come.
any money off of
hey,
it.
Steve.
We did have an
another
attorney
question
come.
About that building, okay, I can't came, saw Cindy, I said.
And you are a business owner
But I
downtown, is that
considered
correct?
tearing it down.
Okay, what,
Just
can I ask
because-
what business you have
Because I
down?
own that whole block.
What my
Yeah.
business
So I was
is,
thinking
I'm
about
a lawyer.
something.
Ah, okay. So you own a building
That
downtown,
requires-
one of the buildings that are in the
Because
district?
there are certain things that
She
you just.
does.
Okay,
Painting something the same
okay,
color.
that's okay.
Or replacing
Right,
window
right,
with the same
right.
window that you can sign off on and
But-
you don't have to go to one of your.
So
buildings.
you have concerns about what you
Those are
might
both
want to
right.
do with
Yeah.
your building?
Yes, but we have
Here's my
called
concern.
special
Right.
meetings.
If-
I don't know what happened
If-
to Jacksonville. I
if-
thought
We have
that
one
was-
conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, can we have one about the process? though?
Your question is about if you wanted to tear that building down.
Yeah, because what Cindy said was, okay, if you want to, because I was looking at the possibility of tearing that building down because it's an eyesore and it's a mess. And it's not downtown, it's 6 blocks away from downtown. But I said, okay, what if I decided I wanted to demolish the building instead? Primarily to get, at least for the time being, property taxes down, because property taxes are insanely high on the building. So she said that goes through a different process. We have to go to a meeting, you have to tell us what you're gonna do with that site, because we don't want vacant lots.
Right.
So we don't want the lot to be vacant, we'd rather have that rundown building that was sitting on that lot that was in foreclosure, that had out of foreclosure. You'd rather have that on the lot. Now, I understand the process, so, but how does this conflict with, because I think you and I talked about this. I had that vacant lot, one of the only vacant lots left on the square. I don't have it anymore, the city's got it now. But when I went to look at doing something with that, like building a building on there, then we had a whole nother layer there, because when I went to talk to Kelly about that, he said, well, you've got to deal with, and this is part of city ordinance, is the Jacksonville Main Street guidelines for building in the Jacksonville business.
that's not-
How does this, yeah, but how will that conflict with this? Because that has very specific requirements about what your windows have to look like, they have to be period windows, you have to be masonry on all 4 sides, you can't afford
Well,
in Jacksonville,
and the,
a building that's 4 sides of masonry and rent it.
what
Yeah.
this actually would do is the commission, then we could take a look at that and refine those guidelines to make them more usable.
Historic
Because they're
Preservation Commission.
Yes.
So if we did this, you'd relook at, because right now you've got
Yes,
that
because
special.
we are talking about doing guidelines for residential and
Because that's what I see
commercial
as a
use.
conflict with that.
And, I think that's something that the commission, that was a rough set of guidelines that was developed many, many years ago,
But
and
it's
they
in-
adopted it.
It's adopted, it's in ordinance.
And-
It's in the municipal ordinance.
And it's enforced rather sporadically.
Plus, because nobody builds anything downtown.
Right.
Can't afford it.
Right next to your property is that former bridal shop,
Which property?
Across the street.
The Circle DS.
the circle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Joyce just moved in.
Yeah, yeah. No.
Oh, no.
The old.
To the, across
Yeah, yeah,
to the east, yeah.
That's a nice building on the outside,
Mhm.
on the outside.
Mhm.
One of our jobs is to try to preserve that building. Now, that doesn't mean that we're gonna invest any money, we don't have money. What we're trying to do is prevent that building from just being demolished. If somebody wants to demolish it, it will happen, we won't stop it. But we would like to convince somebody to use that building because it's a beautiful, potentially, a beautiful building. And if it was demolished, it might just be another blank space there near the downtown.
But
So-
that could be a good thing, because I had, on the other side of the Circle DX building to the west, 2 dilapidated buildings that were over there that were 40 or 50 years old, that people kept breaking into and setting fire to and all that.
Mhm.
And we tore those buildings down. And someday something will go back there. But, and we came to the commission.
Yeah, it's
Steve
not
Martin was
always
running at
bad
the time, and he
to
said,
tear a
okay.
building
He said
down.
it was okay.
But it's better to preserve it if you can.
I know.
If you
So
can,
that's
yes.
one of our jobs.
I'm just talking about process. So the process we're talking about here is if this is approved, I'm still not real clear on who approves it. But if it's approved, we're talking about the buildings in that district. We would now have to go through the same process that I have to go through at, like, the school apartments, because it's in the district now. So if I want to replace the roof, it's a modified bitumen roof. If I want to put another one back on, I gotta go and say, Cindy, I'm putting the same roof back on. But I want to replace it.
Right.
We
But
have
if
to
you
do
want
the
to
same
change
process
the roof
downtown.
pitch, and all of a
Right.
sudden you want to put a dome
Mhm.
over the top of it, then that would require a meeting for us to
You think that'd be a
discover.
problem?
So are these
We
different
would discuss the
locations,
merits of
different
that.
entities? So now we have to go visit the inspection department, now we have to visit you guys. Is there any way of linking them together? I mean, because, no offense, the inspection department's a trip in itself.
Those two are linked. If you go visit the inspection department and get a permit,
Mhm.
then, and it's in a historic district, then it comes to us.
Yeah, they-
Automatically.
No, not automatic. No, you go in and you ask Cindy for a permit application, and she hands you a certificate of appropriateness, and she says, go to the library and see Cindy and get this signed.
Yeah, so
And then
that's,
come
that's
back.
us.
I know, I understand. I
Us could be
understand.
just
No, I
Cindy.
understand, but it's not automatic.
for
It's
permit.
not automatic. You go to
Right.
see Cindy or Kelly, and they give you the certificate of appropriateness and say, you go deal with the Historic Preservation
And
Commission, come back with a signed certificate of
So
appropriateness.
you
then
have to
you
go to
apply
two
for a
places.
license.
Okay.
That's
Yeah,
the-
you
Because
do have to
they
add
tend to
another-
go here, do
Correct.
this, do that, and figure it out yourself, and when you have it all figured out, come to us, and then maybe, if you hold your breath, we'll authorize you.
not really,
That's
and
not
maybe
us,
if you
though.
hold your breath. No, because we usually make a decision, right?
Oh, I'm not talking about you
At
guys.
that.
I'm
Yeah,
talking
no,
about the
you're
inspection
not, you're not
department.
talking about
Oh,
us.
well, that's,
That's the holding your breath.
oh,
Just seems like, well, my question was gonna be, as a follow-up to what Mike was saying about tearing down the buildings, what do you want to rebuild? Do you still have to be historically correct?
no, because it's not a theme park, okay? We're not Disney
I don't
World.
understand that.
We're not Disney World, we're not trying to make everything look matchy-matchy. You don't have to rebuild something that looks like it walked out of the 1880s, okay? It has to be of a style or desire, it would be desirable if it is of a style that is in keeping with and complementary to everyone else's properties.
That's only in the downtown district, though. In the historic preservation district, if you get authorization to tear a building down, you don't have to control new construction. Now, downtown, that-
We've never
I don't think we
faced,
do. We've
I don't
never
think we've
faced
ever.
that.
No
I don't
time
think we've
I've asked that
had
question. No. I've asked that question to the building department. They said, look, because when I tore the building down, historic preservation, when I tore those two at 619, 623 West State years ago, I tore them down. And the question to Kelly was, okay, I gotta go get Steve.
We
And
didn't
Steve was,
approve anything at IC.
huh?
No.
But when I went to Steve to get approval to tear those down, and it went to a meeting and it got approved, it was fine. But I asked Kelly, okay, now do I have to go back to the commission if I have a set of plans to build, a house or a duplex, or that's actually zoned for business? And he said, no, not with new construction, only we control that. Now, in the downtown district, though. Right, but downtown, though, you have that ordinance that's on the books now about I think it's, what's it called, the Jacksonville Main Street District,
Main
right?
Street.
He
Yeah,
basically,
you would
yeah,
have-
he
you'd have to be
basically
closed down.
copied
So this
the
doesn't
whole
change
primitive
that.
set.
That would-
So what the hell's the answer?
So the Main Street District ordinance still exists.
We're not
And-
changing any of the ordinances as they are at this particular moment.
Okay, so-
Approving this, it stays that way. But what?
Doesn't that control renovation too, though? I believe it does. Okay.
The way they have it listed right now, it does.
It does, okay, so
But
now,
what
we
we
have to get
could
approval
do-
from both of them.
But what we are talking about doing is the next step, and this has been brought up a couple of meetings ago, is to further develop the design guidelines and review all of that process.
Because I think you would find there will be some conflicts. If I wanted to renovate.
And I don't think that we
Yeah.
necessarily are in agreement with all of that. That was, like I said, that was a rough set of guidelines.
Judy, I have a question.
But nobody's ever built anything then.
And the reason being is because somebody was wanting to
And
build
right,
a more
so what
building
you-
right on the square.
Yeah.
So, go ahead, Bob, and then I'll.
Well, I don't like the national register, but it doesn't give me the level of pain that the local one does. Why are we acting like those are the same thing? I don't think they are.
Once you
They're
go to
not.
the national,
They're not.
it will give the local.
Well, it seems that they're all tied together.
No, that's why we actually have to have two separate meetings, which,
Yeah,
We
the
just
first-
had.
yes.
The first meeting was the National Register meeting, and this one is the meeting for the possible local ordinance.
Right.
So, can I just let them use my
So
PowerPoint?
when does that come before the council, the next meeting now they're gonna come to?
The council, we would be going back to the council on the
6th, I think.
26th? 24.
We just had one Monday, so
Has there been a
In 2
reading?
weeks.
Has there been a reading of this, Judy?
We asked for a resolution of support at the last one,
there was an ask or request for resolution of support by the council.
based upon,
the district,
Yes.
and then we said we'd like to know, let the public, what their comments.
So it's tabled.
So it's tabled until this meeting.
yes.
Is a resolution for both, for the National Register and some local ordinance?
No, their resolution would be for the local, right?
So who votes on this?
Well, I got
My
lost.
understanding was
The
it would be a
city council.
resolution in support, which then, the local, which then would give the local more clout or more power to go with the national. Am I
The
correct on
national,
that?
yeah, you don't have to give, I mean, you can give a resolution of support for the National Register District, just that you think it's a good idea. But that's a different process. That resolution would be you giving us a local district as well.
The local district as well. correct?
Well, do you have to have a local district to have the national, be on the national
No,
registry?
no.
And it
Many
sounds like-
many communities don't. They don't go forward and have a local ordinance, and they don't create a local district. They're just happy that they have a National Register district. There's no restrictions on anything anyone does. And some of those communities survive, some of them don't survive very well, like Winchester is a good example. Winchester was put on the National Register, and then,
It wouldn't have mattered in Winchester whether there was a local district or not. That was a
Well-
different economics. Well, it's a different economics. You can't say it's historical, whether it's a local historical district. And that's why Winchester didn't flourish.
well, no. I suppose the population is the same in Winchester now as it was back in the 1880s, so it hasn't flourished, it just kind of sort of stays the same. But the district didn't change whether it increased, its viability economically, for sure. It's a strange case. But they had no ordinances, and immediately demolitions began, and the city couldn't stop them because they have no ordinances to stop them, and they lost probably 20% of their historic properties that were included in the district within the first 5 years. And some of them were really significant. And I know because I owned one of the largest mansions in Winchester, and I had sunk a lot of money into restoring it. And my neighbors started tearing their houses down, which made my property values drop, and it made the neighborhood less desirable. And so I eventually moved out, built it new somewhere else. But so the ordinances obviously show that the local community has concerns that they would like to have the district be preserved, its character preserved, and would like to work with property owners, with store owners or business owners to preserve the character of the district. I don't look at it as they're trying to penalize store owners or business owners. This is a facade issue. It generally is always a
Here, let me
facade
interrupt
issue.
you.
Yeah.
What's the story, how does this get enacted so that the local district takes effect? Who's going to make that happen?
Well, they would
City
have to
council.
address that.
That's what I thought.
The council.
Aren't they
yeah.
going to have to pass an ordinance to do that?
Well, we already have a preservation ordinance.
Well, it doesn't cover downtown though.
If the city council offers support,
The council just
There you
let,
go.
whatever the council that was here.
if they offer a vote of support, that is what we would need to go
To
forward.
the ordinance,
Yeah.
yeah.
That
And
would
if
be-
they
So
don't,
that's the political decision-making process, the city council.
and if they don't, you don't get a local ordinance, it stops. And you just have a National Register district, and that's nice, I suppose,
So Cody, is that where, because.
That's where we're at right now,
Yeah,
is,
so if we as, because I think everybody, most everybody
Yeah.
elected here is a building owner.
right.
And obviously we've all got the same concern.
Mm-hmm.
So when we want to stand up and say, because honestly, I think Square looks great. And I think, and a lot of the building owners here are responsible for that.
Right.
I mean, we put a lot of money in those buildings, and most of what's been done down there in the last few years has been done well, I think. and help preserve the character of it.
But also, I'll add to that, nobody downtown was able to take advantage of that 20% preservation tax credit,
Yeah, that's true.
which is huge. It really
It is.
is. If I'm gonna sink $500,000 in a building, I want that 20% credit, and I don't get it if you don't have a district,
And
if
I
it's
think
not
the
listed
high
on the
school apartments
register.
was a tax credit.
So-
It was.
Yeah, so that's probably the biggest selling point for me if I was a building owner in the district
Right.
and I wanted to expand my business or buy another property and put a new business in, I want to take advantage of that federal tax
Right,
credit.
but we all look at this, to some extent,
Mm-hmm.
as another layer of regulation.
Sure,
To
sure.
accomplish something
Yeah.
that,
It's
like,
like the
to just
IRS.
put a roof on or
It's
just
like the
replace
IRS.
some windows or
Yeah.
whatever. But if we want to register our thoughts on the issue.
Yes.
Concerns or support,
Yes.
whichever. Do we do that tonight? Or
No.
do we show up at the council meeting? and do
No.
that? Okay,
Show
council.
up at-
So
yes.
that's where we really need it.
Well, and there needs to be clarification too, because if they want to proceed and have a local ordinance and they want to have guidelines, they need input also from the building owners. Those guidelines can be developed so that maybe they're not as impactful to the building owners. And maybe they do streamline the process as part of the development of this ordinance. Maybe they make life easier for everybody. And that's when you all raise your voices in those meetings and get heard. And you can change things that way.
Cody?
Yes.
Can you be on the national registry without having a local group
Yes.
that oversees it?
Yes, absolutely.
And it's
Yeah.
being on the
And you still
national
get your
registry.
20, and you still get your 20%.
Yes, you still get your, the National Register has nothing to do with local ordinances, local permits, anything like that. It's an honorary system, but you do have this wonderful benefit of, that's run through the IRS and the National Park Service, which is this 20% tax
So
credit.
you do the national registry,
Yes,
and we qualified for that? I mean, how do you do that?
yes. I pretty much can almost guarantee this is going to become a National Register district. The state is for it. They've sent their preliminary opinion to Washington DC, a positive preliminary opinion. And my guess is they'll go ahead and approve it. It doesn't have to ever become a local district. It doesn't have to have local ordinances involved in it. If the community's opposed to that, I mean, that's your right to be opposed to
But
it.
the
But
problem-
you still get the benefit. The great benefit is because it did become a National Register district, now all the building owners that sink a significant amount of money into redevelopment of their properties, or if they buy a new property and they're going to spend money on it, they can qualify for this 20% tax credit, which
And that's the big,
that's
the
on
big-
your personal
Yeah,
income
that's
tax.
the big, right?
It's huge, yeah. Well, I'm gonna tell you right now, the
I'm sorry I
guy,
missed the first part, I didn't know about the
yeah,
first.
the guy that bought the Ayers house is sinking $1.5 million into that house. He's already gone through the review process. It's called the Part 2 tax review process for the 20%. He's going to get 20% of 1.5 million back in the form of a tax credit on his personal income tax
He's still spending
burden
$1.3
for
million,
the
more
next
power to him.
10 years, which is huge. It's
You know,
huge.
Let
To
me
answer-
explain one of the frustrations I have.
Yeah,
We got a letter about tonight's meeting, okay? Nobody before this moment, or whenever I got that letter, we got the letter,
was it
told me
from?
anything about that, and all of a sudden I'm in some district I don't necessarily want to be in. You might have told me this was all going on. Somebody drew the lines before anybody told me I'm inside the box.
Okay,
I don't like that.
okay.
And I don't like that anybody gets to
what
Which
tell
is,
me
that's part of zoning.
What?
That's-
What difference would it make if they
It's
told
like
us?
zoning.
that I'd have raised hell even worse than I'm doing now.
Just earlier.
Earlier, and I'd already talked to mayor, my aldermans, men's, I guess they're both
Persons.
Yeah, yeah.
people, alder people.
So.
And the other ones I'm gonna talk to between now and the council meeting.
I believe that there is also in the existing preservation ordinance, I believe there is a section in there about how to lodge your objections, how to register, how to. Register.
I don't wanna get to that, Judy. I don't wanna get that far.
No, I'm in this process, in the process of making a local district, because the process of making a local district is in our preservation ordinance.
Okay,
This part of town's just not in it
Right.
right now. But
But if they wanted to expand it, or if they want to change
Right,
it,
but what's-
that process is outlined in the existing
understand.
ordinance.
Hey Judy, historically, there was a conversation way back when we started historical district. How come downtown wasn't included? There was a reason why downtown wasn't included then. And I can't think of it to say what's still,
I don't know.
but there was a reason.
I don't know why.
Was it Bob?
Probably, because back in those days, when some of that was started, we still had the beauty of urban renewal all around. We wouldn't have qualified for anything.
Yeah, that wouldn't have been 50 years old, and there were so many of the facades have changed over the years.
That was back to Ron Gray.
So they made us put up canopies for a while. I still got the canopy from the service building in the back.
So other than the 20%.
But is everyone clear on the distinction between
I'm not-
National Register?
I'm not clear on what the local,
Yeah.
I'm not clear on what exactly.
Okay,
The Jacksonville Historic Preservation Commission has recommended the establishment of the downtown Jacksonville Historic District. What does that put us in? A local? I mean, I know it
Yes.
adds a layer of
Yes.
approvals.
They're recommending both.
What's the second part? What's the second?
The-
Both.
Both the National Register
And
District and a local.
But the impact on us as building owners is, in there is we just have a new layer of approval if we want to do something to our building
Right,
or tear it down.
yes,
So that's the impact of this, right?
yes, yes.
If it goes forward, do we have an idea of how long everything goes into effect? When we'll have to make the, get the approvals, when the tax credits are
local
available?
Almost half the square might be torn down.
yeah, the National Register usually takes about 6 months at least for it to go through. And the tax credit process, we're talking about, can be somewhat retroactive. So if you've already bought a building and you're doing renovations, you could hire a tax credit consultant to do your 20% credit out for you.
Because my other two buildings are already done sometime. I'm
Yeah.
just now gutting 2 more buildings and
Yeah.
getting ready to rebuild.
For your information, I don't think that the commission would have had any objections at all to anything that you've done on anything.
Well, no, because I'm a history dork. I'd like to make them the old
And
school.
the same thing with Ramble Camp. And, I mean, there's nothing there to object to.
Yeah.
But I think the local ordinance, if they vote on it, then I think that if they vote a resolution of support, then it would become part of it right
Well,
now.
don't forget, we're talking about the tax credit, the 20%, to comply with some of the things you need to comply with, it's gonna cost you 20% more to do the
Possibly.
and it could.
It could,
Yeah,
but it might not. I mean,
depends on how
it just
involved the
depends on
work.
what your
I
project
do the
is.
labor myself, so.
Exactly.
A lot of times, the
Exactly.
tax credits deal with buildings that all they have left is a historic facade, and they've got rehabs, which is fantastic. That means you bought the building for $30,000, all it was a facade, and you're gonna sink $500,000 into turning it into, loft apartments with maybe 3 storefronts on the front. You can do whatever you want to the inside. You're gonna get that 20% credit,
Right.
because that facade is in the district.
That's exactly what I've done.
Yeah.
Got it, everything brand
And
new.
that's
but-
what makes it exciting, because when I said we're talking facades here, that's literally what we're talking about. And I don't think people understand that when there are ordinances for districts locally, generally they just deal with the facade if it's a commercial district. They just want to make sure that building that we just saw in these pictures still looks like that building on the outside. It may have new signage, but on the inside, they don't have a horse in that race.
We realize
Cody?
that business has changed.
I
Yeah.
think that, at least from my perspective, I understand completely now there's a separation between national and local.
Sure.
My big concern is about the local, and that's kind of what the question.
Well, that's always the concern, yeah.
Sure.
If I may
Let me
Before,
say
no,
this.
let me finish, before I forget, my memory's not so great anymore. But before this goes farther to the council or whatever, will there be a list of the criteria that you would work under so that the councilman and the building owners would actually know what they're getting themselves into? I mean, right now, it just seems like you're kind of flying by the seat of your pants. Well, we're
That would be
gonna develop this
design
criteria.
guidelines.
Pardon me?
That would be a set of design.
Well, there already is
guidelines.
that. In order to
Right,
see
but we
Jackson-
want to-
But now she's saying, we might want to change the criteria, we're gonna look at this, we're gonna look at that. Is there gonna be a concrete set of criteria?
Yeah.
I
And
mean, I think that's
usually,
important.
well, usually, I'll give you an example, Chester, Illinois, you know where Chester is,
Yeah.
kind of southern Illinois.
So they're-
I developed design guidelines for them like 10 years ago, because they were wanting a national register district, and they wanted to turn it into a local district and all this. And, the design lines were real cut and dry. They said if your building contributes to the district, we want you to maintain the historic character of the outside of the building. There's wiggle room on windows, you know, because we know not everybody's going to be able to get historic window material to replace them, etc. There's energy efficient, you know, issues and things of that sort. So there was wiggle room on stuff like that. But they didn't want you to significantly change the look of the building on the outside. And signage was the other issue. They just wanted to be able to review the signage that you wanted to put up.
Well, I'm thinking.
And that was it. That was
Yeah.
literally
Well,
their-
There is-
now she's
that was
talking-
their
What
design
we're talking
guidelines.
about is.
Yeah.
I just
what
wanna
he
know,
said.
I just wanna know how detailed this criteria is gonna be.
Right.
You're talking
What
about
there
what kind
is
of roof you
right
can put
now.
on, what you can do for here, what you can do for there.
Well, and also these commercial buildings, you know, most of these buildings downtown are flat roof, the roofs are not visible. If they're not visible to the public, there's no issues.
Well,
You
then
still
that
have
should,
to-
that should
still
be the
have to get
criteria.
approval, though.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think it should be in writing.
Well, you have to get that from
There
the
is,
city anyway.
you can
Because
read the guidelines
safe-
that he's
without the
referencing.
It's a
certificate.
They're part of
safety
the-
issue.
The
No,
downtown.
no,
But you
you
said
gotta
you're
get
gonna
approval.
change it.
Yeah,
But you still
yeah.
gotta get
We
the
hope
certificate
to.
of appropriateness.
Well,
Yeah.
and-
before
Yeah, I
make a
You're
educated,
saying you'd like to see it sped up.
opinion.
No,
They ought to see the final product.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can understand that.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
But I mean, is there-
Openings on the local commission. And while we're putting together some of these things, it would be nice to have some of the local businessmen join our commission and help us
I would love
put
to.
these together.
That's a great
You know, There's a
idea.
lot of concern here.
Absolutely.
Why don't you become part of the commission? It's one
Because the mayor doesn't like you.
one meeting.
Speak for yourself.
You don't like me either.
Well, it's good, diversity is great when it comes
But
to
we have a lot of
commissions.
businessmen here, and we
So-
do need some on the commission. If the downtown is going to be part of it, then you should be part of the commission too.
I agree.
We should have some attorneys.
I travel.
We should have some
I
businessmen.
travel as part of my
You're
business.
flaring
but
about
I
that
would love to
idea.
be part of it. I'm
Well, Ed
available.
does too, and he's part of the commission. When he's here,
I'd love
he joins, so.
to. You know, I've always been one to.
Could I say something about how we work? So there's all this discussion about written guidelines. We rarely need to consult written guidelines when we're faced with issues that have to do with the residential.
I like that and I hate that.
Right, right.
Be-
There,
The
there
guidelines-
is a set of
the
written
guidelines
guidelines,
are-
it's called the Secretary of Interior Standards. And that is loosely what we follow. We try to take into consideration where people are, what their situation is financially, and what their end goal is. And we factor that in. So therefore, there are some cases where, like Steve said, people have been, it's okay to do certain things that we really don't like necessarily, but it's better that they're saving the building than to tear it down and have yet another empty lot that nothing can go up
In
on.
today's
what's going
world,
on
in
top of
today's
those.
world with all the stuff that goes on, I hate to hear that some people can do it this way, some people can do it that way.
Well-
It just depends, because,
It depends on what
and
you're
listen, I'd
wanting
I'd
to
rather
do.
have the flexibility,
That's what I'm
I would
saying.
rather have the flexibility.
We have the flexibility.
until
Because
I
we
have a
don't
project
want-
and you're not flexible.
We don't want to say there's one size that fits all, and whether you're a homeowner who happens to have no money, but you have a piece of your home that needs work, or a homeowner with some significant resources and you could afford to do something else, we want to be able to work with different people in the situation that they're in. Every home is different.
When you mentioned the two buildings that were adjacent to you or close to you that, you know, it looks like no one's gonna be able to do anything with, there's been no interest in them, the commission has to take that into account. And if, you know, they're not gonna wanna see those buildings be vacant and be, you know, just ghost houses or whatever.
But the
for
reality
The next
is-
20 years, and so they look at economic issues too, and clearly this example of what's gonna happen to that east block here when you first enter the square, it's gonna get demoed here very soon. That's nearly an entire, or half a city block is gonna go away because nobody would invest in it. Nobody wanted it, it just sat there. And so those are issues that, you know, they're human enough to understand that if, you know, if nothing's gonna be developed there, they don't want a vacant building. They just don't want a vacant rat-infested
Is there
building.
anything in this, or has the effort been made, how much effort was made into preserving that building? I mean, if
I've
towns and
worked-
She's talking to everybody. How about me?
Yeah.
She's trying everybody on that one.
Yeah,
I mean, what about the fact the city owns it now, right?
yeah,
So
well,
does the city
I
have
got
to
a
abide
set
by
of
the
keys to it,
guidelines?
the city didn't have a set of keys to
Yeah,
it.
the city wants to tear that down.
Yes.
The council
city-
wants to tear that building down.
Is
They
that
have
the one in
to-
the southeast corner? with the
Yeah.
number
Yeah,
50?
yeah,
And I have.
yeah, it's just a facade, that's all that's left.
Trying to get someone
You
to
know,
take that.
The walls, all the
And
walls,
to
the
the
other
point
three
that
walls
it's
are,
out of time.
except for,
Out of
I guess,
time.
the
I wish the city.
west
would
wall
take
is still
that
stable
on
where
as
it's
a
attached to
project
the other building.
of
And
theirs.
yeah,
Right.
it's
Problem is,
let's
Yeah.
put it this way.
you can't
I
put
wouldn't
anything
even
up there.
touch it,
Yeah.
and I've taken out
If
some
someone
big
gave it
Right.
to me
You
for
can't put something-
500
you can't
bucks,
build there
I'd
and come
take
out
it and I
financial.
would save the front facade.
This is
You
the-
can't
And I would,
sell.
Right.
and I would do a
You
total
have
gut
to-
rehab
yeah,
on
Main
it.
Street.
And that's what I
guidelines,
told
which is
you.
Right.
masonry on
I would have
all
loved to
four
have seen
sides.
that
Can't do
done.
For $300-400 a square
No,
foot.
I should live so
And then you're
long.
gonna rent it for
Like I said, I've
$6
taken
a
out
foot.
some doozies.
Yeah.
Or-
Yeah.
$350
But see,
a
when
month.
you do a case, when you do a
Yeah.
case like this, on the south side of the square, you've got buildings that, in your pictures, what if Jimmy hits the lottery and he says, you got the old hospital building, the old Woolworth building. Do they have to keep it looking like hospital? Or what if they come back and say, we want to put all brick facades up there, we want to make it look like, that'd be okay.
If what they want to do is
If-
appropriate to a downtown. Now, if
And
somebody's,
not to what that building was, because you're talking about
not
maintaining the
necessarily.
historical
If-
integrity of the
Well, and
building.
those
There's
are
a
weird, the
vacant
buildings
lot on
you
the
used are
north
weird
side.
cases because there's actually historic facades hidden underneath the
Under-
main
right.
facade. Yeah.
So what would you look at in that case, that is a good.
Because that's-
Because in that case, you take the old panels off the front, you got an old building behind it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you wanted to do something.
But you got no front underneath it.
Right.
Right,
You got 20 foot.
Right,
you
so
got
what
20 foot
are you
barrier.
looking at? What would you be looking at if he comes and says, I need to put a new facade on that building? And if you're gonna take this to the state, please ask him to pay the rent on the buildings down there.
Yeah.
But he says, okay, I hit the lottery, I wanna do something with this building, I wanna put a new
Never
face
happened.
on it. But if he does.
he said he
how
hit
do
the
you-
lottery.
How do
I
you
said
look
never
at
happened.
50 years ago, it was the Osco building?
You gotta
It
buy
was
a
Osco
ticket
first.
Right.
You
Right,
take that off,
Yeah.
probably an old brick facade.
well, you
Well-
Yes, it looks just like,
remember,
it looks just like a brick house.
Right, so what,
exactly, because the brick house had a facade just
but my
like
question
that.
is, what is he gonna hear when he goes and says?
Well, you've got two historic
Right.
facades on it now. So the
Yeah, 'cause
city,
they're both over 50
that's a
years old.
conundrum because I know the state, some of the architects at the state that review these processes sometimes, they love modernism. So they love the modern
Yeah, but
panels.
it's, here, we go from.
They love the
Six-
panels
say-
and they would say, don't take the panels
The
off. But
state
then,
historic preservation came by and says, don't take the panels
Yeah.
off, because that was appropriate to the time.
yeah, but then you have
That's what
others,
they
you
said.
But it
have
depends
others
on what
there
you
that
wanna
would say,
do
oh, take them
upstairs.
off
And
and
what
let's.
you wanna do upstairs requires, for example, if you wanted to put apartments up there.
Absolutely.
And you have to have the air, and you have to have the egress, and you have to have the window. So then you would wanna do something.
Absolutely.
So then by all means, you'd wanna take the front off of
Right.
that, and then we would work with you to, it's kind of hard to say what we would do, because that's an unknown. We don't know what it looks like underneath there. But to make that the most acceptable project to you and to the downtown area, and in terms of appearance.
And the period of significance, which we didn't get to on this, was from 1860 to 1968. So, all the cool places we used to hang out, I'm 61, so in the 60s.
It's 18, yeah, the
Yeah, to
oldest one we found was
1968.
1860.
Yeah, so these storefronts you're talking about, these more modern looking storefronts, if they were built from 1968 back, 61 to 68 or something like that, they're considered historic, they're 50 years old. And so now you do have this conundrum, what do? Do we just leave the kind of kitschy material on the front of the building, or do we take it out? I'll tell you what Franklin, Tennessee did. Have any of you been to Franklin outside of Nashville? Do any of you do heritage tourism, and do you go to historic towns like Galena, or do you go to any of these towns that are districts? Well, you know, they make
We don't have
their,
that much time.
they make their money. This is where all the Nashville stars relocated to. They all poured out of Nashville and they went to Franklin as soon as Franklin became a National Register Historic District, because they liked the ambiance. They liked the flavor of the brick streets and the gas street lamps and the historic downtown with the cute little shops and all that. Garth Brooks was the first one to invest nearby. And now it's just full of country music stars and very expensive to live there. But Nashville, Franklin ran into the same thing. They had 60s storefronts, 50s storefronts, and what they said was, you have two storefronts that are both historic. We don't care which one you preserve as long as you preserve one of them. So,
Well, I think the
That's
other
how
thing
they
that
dealt with
what we've also come across in this process
Yeah.
of reviewing the buildings in terms of are they significant or non-significant right now. And one of the things that's very obvious is that all of the storefronts have changed over time. It's from the second floor up that makes that building really identifiable
Right.
as to what it is.
when you see those
We have
arched
some of those old
windows,
storefront pictures, and you don't know
Mhm.
what building is that storefront on. But when you pan out a little bit and you
Right.
look at the building as a whole, then you can tell. So more than finding a theme that you stick to, is what you're doing appropriate? Does it look good? Or are you covering the whole front with sheet metal and doing something that detracts? You can see how the front of all of these have changed over time.
yeah, like this
Cover the
this
tracks and
row right,
windows.
this
Yes.
row right here. You know, you've got modern storefronts. They've bricked in display windows, etc. But you go upstairs and you've got the original windows from the original construction date. Same thing on the rest of these buildings here. You've got Italianate arches, which pegs it for around 1870 or so, but yet we've got a 1960s storefront down here. And since the storefront is actually historic under the date span, which goes to 1868, if you wanted to keep that storefront, that's fine. If you want to change that storefront, usually what a commission will say is, change the storefront to either complement the historic second floor, or go with a storefront that is from this time period.
So basically what you do is leave it alone.
You can, or you can make it, because storefronts that are new today aren't so much different than that.
Right. That's it, basically you leave it alone.
Yeah.
So in a nutshell, basically what I'm hearing is, don't make it horrible looking modern plastic, as long as it's something between 1860s and 1960s. As long as you pay respect and homage to the building, you guys are pretty much cool with it, and we'll work with people.
Well, we talk about the photo op moments too, and here's something to remember. If you grew up in this town and you moved away 40 years ago, if you come back next year, will you recognize the town? Will you recognize the downtown? Those buildings that you no longer recognize are most likely the ones that have slipped into that. They're non-contributing. They've been so altered that they no longer have their historic
Another great
character.
example of that is the old R bar, used to be Bill's Regulator. Behind that facade really isn't anything. Mugsy's was another example. We have pictures of what it was before a devastating fire, but you can go on the upstairs and everything's still charred. It's like they put the fire out and covered up the front, and there you go.
Every building I've had has had a fire.
So you want to,
Yes.
that's what the photo
And
op
so-
description is. You want to save these moments where when someone comes into town that maybe was, you know, I've got an 86-year-old mom who has been to a lot of these towns, you know, and she was a Chrysler boat product swimming suit model in the late 1940s. So she traveled all across the Midwest, and she's been to a lot of these towns. And when she came to Jacksonville for the first time was 30 years ago, since she was a teenager, basically. And She got to the square, now the square hadn't changed, but what she noticed, she said, well, the square looks different. And then I took her on the side streets, she goes, oh, I kind of recognize these side streets. She recognized the buildings because they hadn't been that significantly altered. I think what threw her on the square was you still had the one-story modern buildings and the plaza wasn't back in. So the whole idea of having a district is to preserve that sense of place that this town has respected this pattern of growth from 1860 to 1968, and the stores and the buildings that are still here embody the characteristics of those time periods from 1860 to 1968. And what you want to do is maintain that, and wanting to diminish the character of the district or even demolish the character of the district, that's when you run into the problems. But, so that's what it's all
If
about.
somebody came in and wanted to pull an urban renewal
No.
again,
That's what we're trying to counteract.
Yeah.
that is the kind of thing that we're
Think of how
trying to
much better
say,
the town is.
no.
And some words have been used interchangeably, so I want to clarify one thing. I've heard we only care about the facade of the building. I've heard we only care about the exterior of the building. In my mind, those are two different things.
In a commercial district. No, they're not two different things. Well, the exterior, you can have a public facade. Tom Groging's building is a good example. Right here. He's got two public facades because they demolished the building that used to sit here. So now this side is visible. It wasn't before. So he has a public facade here. He has a public facade here. So that's why the council or the commission would be interested in what he wants to do. And same thing if he did a federal tax credit project. The state's already told him, no, you can't put balconies here.
But you can put windows.
But
So
you can
if
put
the
windows.
exterior is a bigger thing than the facade because there's also the back,
But
side.
but
then
most of the
The
commercial.
Ayers house is a really good example because right now they have poured the footings for a concrete handicap accessible ramp. But you can't see it if you're looking at the front of the building.
Right. It's
because
hidden on the
It's
side.
around the corner. So it is the exterior, but the council, the Historic
Commission,
Preservation
yeah.
Commission, does not have jurisdiction to say, no, you can't do that, or that's a terrible. That's something that is out of sight from the street and therefore out of our purview.
Well, I'm just thinking of our specific block, and I'll use it as an example. We're bounded on the south by State Street, we're bounded on the north by Court Street. There's traffic up and down Court Street.
Right.
But I don't think anybody would consider it to be the main thoroughfare.
That's
You
still a
care
fac-
what we do?
Yeah.
You're on the
Okay.
corner.
That's still a
It's
facade.
visible to a street.
So it's,
Unfortunately,
Yeah.
you've got two facades.
Right.
Isn't
Like
there
Tom
vinyl across
does.
the back of those buildings?
What's
Yeah.
that?
Isn't there vinyl across the back of some of those buildings? Eddie?
We actually put sheet metal over one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Typically, the tertiary facade or the rear of the facade, the federal standards for preservation, written up and drawn up by the Secretary of the Interior's office, they don't mess with the rear facade unless you have one of these bizarre alley setups where your alley setting, where the rear of the building's now like New Orleans, they all have balconies and they have cool little patio bars and stuff like that. Well, now they have ordinances about the backs of those buildings because they're public. In the past, they weren't
What
public.
he's referring to, you know where my office is.
Yeah,
the
yeah,
back
he's
of
on the
mine.
corner to
He's
the
Yes, he's just down from
west,
that.
right, to the west.
Which historically was not a facade of his building because there was a whole nother block of
That's right,
buildings
that's right.
that
Yeah.
blocked that view.
Yeah,
So his building was never designed to be looked at
Right.
affectionately from the back.
right, exactly.
And there's an entrance there, but
And,
on the whole block, there are entrances in those buildings.
And I would
some of
think
them are public
the
entrances.
commission wouldn't have an interest in what you did back there. Am I correct on that? I mean, in the rear of the building?
Right,
So,
right.
yeah.
I
But,
think
and his
it's-
alley facing, properties. I mean, we're not alley crazy down here like they are up in Chicago and the burbs and stuff like that. They love the alleys, and they do have a say. Their local ordinances have a say on what you do in alleys. And look at this right here. There's an alley, and look at the original signage on that building that's still there. I would say if this guy that owns this building wants to do something that impacts that historic signage there, that ghost signage, the commission might have a say on that. Because that in itself is part of the historic character of that building. Why anybody would want to remove it, I don't know, but it happens. And so that's an exception there. But in a lot of communities, alleys are important. Jacksonville just is not an alley-driven community. We don't have that many of them downtown, you know. There's not a lot of traffic.
We do, and
on
we
them,
used to
so.
use them extensively
Yeah.
before the square got reopened. But again, using that as an example, there's still an appeal process.
Right.
So, you know, if you wanted to, for example, whenever the Beckers redid the outside of the building that I'm in, when they took off the old billboards, guess what? There was a big old ghost sign up there. I don't think anybody on the commission would have said, hold on, wait a minute. We can't do this entire project because there's an old sign right there.
Well, that building was falling over too.
Yeah.
I think that it's
Joy would have told you what you could do with your son.
Well,
exactly.
I can tell you.
But she
And
didn't
that's
have to
why we
because we're
say,
reasonable.
There is that.
it depends, yeah.
Well, even federal.
That's why we say
Yeah.
it depends on the project.
But even federal preservation law allows for compromise. In fact, it insists on it. And a trade-off would have been, and even with a case like this, is the commission could say, yes, you can cover that up, but just document it before you cover it up. Take photographs, have somebody take photographs of it. That's the trade-off. Get us some pictures of what it looked like before you cover it up. And that's what the feds do all the time. That's what we did at the state level. Section 106 review process, we would go in and I reviewed all federal projects in Illinois, which you can imagine how many thousands that is. Anybody that got any federal money for anything, I don't care if it was a local project, you know, a shelter, a homeless shelter or something like that that was getting federal money. I even had to review that, even though it didn't impact historic property at all. And I had to decide whether it did and deal with it. But we compromised all the time because oftentimes the greater good of the project outweighed the historic character of the building.
And that is totally taken into
And
consideration.
the compromise would be document what the building's like before you muck it up. You know, so it does happen. And so I understand the lawyers' issues back here in a sense, but you know, that's also, I hear that all the time too. And you have to realize that, you know, you have a historic community, you live in a historic community, and it's always going to be that way. Jacksonville is historic. It was founded in 1825. You can't take that away. And there's people that live here for a reason, and one of the reasons they live here is they like the quality of life here, they like the looks of the community, they like the downtown now, much more than they have in the last few years. And so having a district here is a good thing. It's a good thing to have it in the residential area too, because do houses sit very idle very long in the residential area that are in the historic district that are for sale? It seems like they get fetched up pretty quick from what I see. And so there are people that want to be a part of this community, and the historic district is part of the character of the community. It's very important. I mean, I think it is. I've just always grown up around historic communities. We had access to them, and we liked to shop there. They always had the cooler shops, you know, the better restaurants, and they seem to be almost safer communities too, for one reason or another. So there's a quality of life, I think, also in historic communities that are well maintained that you don't have in a lot of other towns. And so,
Again, we understand, especially with the commercial buildings, that, you know, you do have to get new windows. And the glass company doesn't like to carry the replacement glass that's 6 feet wide and 10 feet
They
tall.
won't put it up.
and it doesn't meet modern safety
can't- you can't-
standards.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, somebody broke one of the windows out of the front of the Sears building last year, and I had to come in and put
That's
a board in
right.
the center of
Yes.
it because they can't legally put that glass up.
That's right.
Exactly.
So there's compromise right there.
So, exactly.
Yeah.
And we get that, but, you know, wherever possible, at least you didn't, you know, slap T111 siding up and cover the
There
whole
was
front of the
that.
building.
That was
And I would have painted it.
Yeah,
Plan B.
Yeah.
What was it?
So where- so
People
where are
used to
we?
always say, if you want nice, you gotta pay for
Yeah,
nice.
So where are we? So Judy,
So
at
right-
the council, okay.
yeah.
This is not a vote.
We
We
can't,
can't
I
take a vote.
understand. So the resolution has been written, right? I mean, it sounds, they
We have
tabled,
requested a resolution of support. I don't know.
it's not drafted yet?
I don't know.
Because
if
they said they tabled.
At the next city council.
Dan writes these things.
Okay, so there's one, when is the meeting?
It would be-
First reading this.
They're the
The
ones. who
very
make the
next
decision.
council.
Next
meeting.
council
So,
meeting,
it's
Should
25th?
Yeah.
Is that the
Monday,
day?
it's a Monday.
Yes,
Yeah,
it's
there
a
was.
Monday. Yes. That'd be
Okay, so
25th.
Monday the
And I
25th.
Want me
think
to
that there's
speak for
a
you?
process that you can write.
You write a letter.
You can write a letter.
Hoxton. Hoxton. Varble is a young guy. Wrong Steve.
Judy, do you have public comment period on any of these things that you do, like requesting, you know, a district, a local district? Is there a public
Well,
comment
it would be
period?
just a regular council meeting process, and I
And they'd
think
be a
there is
resolution, they'd
public.
adopt a resolution.
Right.
Yeah, and there's a,
There'd be a workshop
Public.
session, there'd be public, they'd let you take public comment at
But
the council.
be involved in the process. I mean, meeting was supposed to be in at 7 o'clock, it's almost 8 o'clock. I'd say you're involved in the
I believe I
process.
will.
And that's a
and
good
great.
thing.
We want that.
I'm still here.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, we want that, we want input, because
Yeah.
I agree, and I wanna make sure that whatever design guidelines are there, that it's easy for them in that office to interpret.
Yeah, I'm just concerned about the conflicts with that. and
Because
Jacksonville Main Street guidelines.
interpretation in there and intent over here can be pretty far apart.
Well, and they should
we
have
to
one
make
set of
sure-
guidelines.
Right, and there's two now.
They may end up with a new set of guidelines that takes into account concerns that the local business owners have. So.
And they should.
And they should. And so the way I see this playing out is that if they want to go to a local ordinance and have a local district, then they must take into account store and property owners' concerns in crafting the new design guidelines and streamline the process so everybody isn't jumping over 5 hurdles when they maybe only need to jump over 2.
Wouldn't you agree that needs to be in writing?
What I just said?
Wouldn't you agree that the guidelines need to be?
Oh, they are.
They
They
will
usually
be.
are.
They
Yeah,
will be.
yeah.
Well,
And towns are now.
They
Yeah.
are
Actually,
now.
towns are in the ordinance.
but they're not necessarily, I don't think,
Well, usually the design guidelines, like when we did Chester,
I just
we
don't
sent
think-
every building
I'm not happy with it. I
owner
just
a
don't
set
think
of
it-
design guidelines. They're a
you-
quarter
you-
inch thick.
I get that, but
Yeah.
I'm talking about more
You could if you were
revised,
a user.
About what?
smaller projects. Small projects, not necessarily big projects.
Yeah, well, the design lines covered them too, and that could be window replacement, it could be painting extra, it could be putting a new roof on, or new
But not all of
downspout,
those
something
things
like
require
that, you
a
know.
Say it again?
not all of those things require a
CUC,
permit.
right.
And you only need a certificate of appropriateness if it requires a permit.
Does an awning require a permit? We've never.
I think it depends on what the awning's made out of.
I thought anything
You have to
over
look and
Yeah.
see.
$115 required a permit.
A lot of times the canvas awnings don't require a permit because they're easily removable.
Yeah,
And if you mount them in the mortar joints of
I
the
don't
building,
think
it doesn't
awning
affect the
requires
masonry.
I've got-
But if you
I've
start,
got-
you know,
And number three-
installing
Never done
metal
the
awnings that
downtown,
require a lot
so-
more damage to
Right.
the
Well,
facade,
they-
then
And then they want an
maybe,
engineer.
yeah. So,
Thank you for putting this meeting on, everybody.
well, thank you
Thank you for
for,
coming.
thank you for contributing heavily to the
I don't,
fund.
the only thing heavy to me is right here.
Oh, well,
No, we do want your input. We do.
and the lawyer stuck it out here, that's a good
Sorry,
thing.
we got it down.
So,
Oh, I've been through worse than this.
well,
Because that's all new.
I'm around. I'll be, meanwhile, my envoy, Mr. Hazer,